All right, so good morning or afternoon or whenever you're watching this. Um, I thought it might make a little more sense, the notes, if I talked through them a little bit. So I thought I would make a quick video so we could all be on the same page for these opening chapters. Because we have no classroom, we have no offices, but biochem must continue. Biochem always moves on. Um, Point being is that I'm going to make a quick video. If you go onto Canvas, there should be all the notes for chapter 1 should be up on Canvas. They're in 2 parts. So I'm going to try to do 2 videos. So this first part covers part 1, which is what we would have done in class on Wednesday, so yesterday, because I'm recording this on Thursday. And then part 2 will be what we would have gone over in class on Friday. There is a quiz that I have uploaded to Canvas as well. It's just a couple of questions to make sure that we're all following along on the major points of what these notes cover for the first chapter. So go ahead and you can do a Word document to fill those out, shoot me an email with the answers, however you want to turn it in. But I think it'll get us all on the same page for chapter 1. Okay. So just to jump right into it, I feel like every science class I've ever taken kind of starts the same way. We either talk about water, what makes it unique, or we talk about what is life, what makes something alive. So both biology and chemistry classes, they all start kind of the same way. So that's what chapter 1 of biochem is really about. Kind of what is life, what makes something alive, and then that branches out into more definitions that we'll need to know, things that kind of don't fit very well in any other chapters. Okay? Just before we get started, this is at the bottom of the page on the part 1, chapter 1 notes. I thought was kind of an interesting way to look at biochem and how it fits into all of the other sciences. It was something I was really looking forward to drawing up on the board in a classroom. But of course, you see, this is my kitchen table area. This is our classroom currently. Okay? So first of all, just where biochem fits on the hierarchy of sciences. If we say, okay, down at one end we have sociology, which is the study of like how populations, how groups of people interact. Sociology is really just applied psychology. So groups of people act the way they do because of people acting the way that they do, because of psychology. Okay? So if we take another step, when we look at psychology, we say, okay, psychology is really just applied biology. Okay? Psychology, people act the way they do because of what's going on in their brains, what chemicals are there, what processes are happening, neurons firing, all of that fun stuff, hormones interacting, etc. Okay. Another step down the hierarchy, we say that biology is just applied chemistry. Okay. So that's what we deal with in biochem. So all of those processes in our bodies that make us behave and act the way that we do, or keep us alive, or however, whatever process that they're working, they really depend on the chemical reactions occurring in our bodies and in our cells. We have organs and organ systems all working together, and they're made of cells that are constantly letting things across their membranes and keeping other things out of their membranes, and doing all of these reactions to make ATP. So we say that biology is really just applied chemistry. Okay, so that is what our class is focused on. So if we go even further on that hierarchy, we say that, well, chemistry is just applied physics. So the chemical reactions occur the way they do because atoms and molecules behave the way they behave. They have orbitals, they have valence electrons. You can ask Dr. Liu about all of that other stuff, okay? I went to see the Oppenheimer movie. I understood none of it because physics is beyond my level of comprehension, okay? But I do know that chemistry is really just applied physics. Okay? And then even further down on the far end of our hierarchy, we say that Well, physics is just applied mathematics. So physics, atoms, molecules, everything behaves the way that they behave because, they want 8 in their valence shell, and 6 plus 2 is 8. Okay, so they get 2 electrons, or whatever the case may be. Physics works the way it works because math is the way that it is. So if we were to go even further on that hierarchy, we'd say mathematics is just, well, it's not applied to anything. Mathematics just is. Okay. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at where biochem kind of falls in our hierarchy of what we're looking at in the sciences. Okay. So like I said, at the very beginning of looking at biochem, like looking at every other science class, we'll start with looking at what is life. And again, these notes are up on Canvas, so we'll talk about the first part of the notes here in this video. Okay. So first of all, what is life? You don't need to remember all these definitions, just kind of remember the gist of what I'm saying. I tried to bold whatever words were bolded in the book, whatever things I think might be good that you actually know the definition of. I tried to bold a lot of those in the notes as well, but I think all of it kind of meshes together. So first of all, what is life? The biochem book that I've been looking at, it's got a little list of things. So the first thing, it says life is complex and dynamic. It goes on to say that, okay, all organisms, all living things are made up of basically the same elements. So carbon, we are carbon-based life forms, so that is the big one. And if you've taken organic chemistry, or if you're going to take organic chemistry, you know that organic chemistry is the study of carbon-based molecules. So all organisms are made up of carbon and also a lot of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, to a lesser extent sulfur and phosphorus. Okay. Of course, there are other elements thrown in there, but those are the major ones. Okay. We can throw the prefix bio in front of pretty much every science term, and then it makes it apply to biochemistry. Okay, so just like I did, biochemistry. So, right. One of the other ways that we can do that, biomolecules. Okay, so these are the molecules that are important to know for biochemistry. So by definition, biomolecules are molecules that are made by living organisms. So they're therefore organic or carbon-based. So that's definitely a term that we should at least have rattling around in the back of our mind. Okay. And then all of the processes involved in life, such as, digesting food, getting energy from that, growth and development, all of those involve thousands of different chemical reactions, utilizing the biomolecules, utilizing other molecules, tons of molecules, countless numbers of molecules interacting with one another, rearranging themselves, etc. Okay, so all that to say is that life is complex. Okay, the second point in the what makes something alive, what is life? Life is organized and self-sustaining. So living organisms are very organized. It might not look like it when you're looking down at the little nitty-gritty details, but life tends to be organized in a hierarchy system. Okay. So if you think about it, okay, atoms form molecules, molecules form, larger and larger molecules, such as our biomolecules. Those molecules eventually form cells. Okay, cells form tissues, tissues form organs, organs form organ systems altogether form an organism. We can go even further if we wanted to talk about ecology. So organisms together form a population, and multiple populations of different organisms form a community, and then all the living and non-living things in an area is the biosphere or whatever. Point being is that all of those steps are pretty, well established, a hierarchy. So life is very organized. Okay. I did say that the bigger molecules, the biomolecules that we were talking about, another term that you'll definitely see come up in this class is macromolecules. So smaller molecules form much bigger molecules that we call macromolecules. In general, we'll be talking about macromolecules that are polymers that are formed of smaller molecules called monomers. Okay, so nothing super complex, just that smaller molecules, monomers, there tend to be, one here and one that's exactly like it here, and one that's exactly like it here, and one that's exactly like it here. They all come together to form one big overarching macromolecule. Okay. We will talk about this ad nauseum, but the major ones that we're going to discuss, so nucleic acids, so DNA and RNA, those are the nucleic acids. They are polymers made up of monomers called nucleotides. Okay, the same thing, proteins are polymers made up of the monomers called amino acids. Large carbohydrates, also known as polysaccharides, they are formed up of monomers called monosaccharides or simple sugars. Okay, so a lot of the macromolecules, biomolecules that we talk about, and we'll go more into depth about each one, they are big polymers, molecules made up of smaller subunits called monomers. Okay? On the subject of important molecules, we'll talk a lot more about this, especially when we're talking about proteins. But just so we have it established now, one of the more important molecules that we do have in our bodies, or in any living organism's bodies, are enzymes. So enzymes are proteins that act as a catalyst, meaning they speed up chemical reactions. So again, if we said that biology is just applied chemistry, so everything that happens biologically happens because a chemical reaction happens, that is true. So tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of chemical reactions are occurring in our bodies all the time. Most of these would occur way too slowly to be any good. So we would die of old age before a lot of these reactions could take place. So fortunately, we have proteins called enzymes to kind of speed up those reactions and keep us alive. All right. In those chemical reactions in our bodies, we'll talk a lot about biochemical pathways. So, one chemical reaction leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. So the products from one chemical reaction are converted to, the reactants from one chemical reaction are converted to products. Those products are the reactants for another reaction. Those products are the reactants for another reaction, and so on. So if you start, make sure I don't go off the camera here. If you start all the way here with reactants, and step by step by step by step by step, we get an ultimate product. So we say there's a lot of biochemical pathways to get from one thing to something quite a bit different. Okay, and enzymes are kind of present at every step of the way to speed that up and let it happen. Okay, when we look at lots of chemical reactions and lots of biochemical pathways, okay, we have, this chemical pathway is producing this, and this one's producing this, and then this one's producing this. If we take all of those chemical reactions, all of those biochemical pathways in our body, and if we were to add them up, we have a fancy term for that. It's a term that you have heard, okay? That term is metabolism. So all of the chemical reactions, sum total in an organism's body, is metabolism. And yes, organisms are able to kind of regulate their metabolisms. You go out in the heat, you start sweating to cool things down. Okay, you go out in the cold, and your body starts shivering to kind of heat things up. Our body is very reactive to changes in our internal and external environments, and so we can kind of speed up our metabolism or slow it down as need be within general ranges. And then just overall, as we get older, our metabolism kind of starts to slow down a little bit. So it's not a rigid, okay, I have 12 joules of energy metabolism that I use every day. No. It's going to be something that's kind of in flux. So you've heard this term before, but the ability of organisms to kind of maintain a precise range of what they want these biochemical pathways to be in, despite changing environments, that is called homeostasis. Okay, so it's another bolded term, pops up in every science class I've ever had. Okay. All right, so moving on, point number 3, I think it is, for what makes something alive, what makes life. This is a big one. So life is cellular. Okay, so the basic unit of life is the cell. All right. If you break down a cell anymore, then those components are not alive. So if you have a cell and you take out a nucleus and a ribosome and an endoplasmic reticulum, you just have organelles now. They are no longer alive. So the cell is the smallest unit of life that we have. Okay? Cells are very able to kind of control their own environment. We'll talk about their membranes and how they control what comes in and out of the cell, and different cells perform widely different functions. So an amoeba is a single cellular organism, so it does everything that cell needs to stay alive. Our heart cells, they have to get nutrients from elsewhere because their whole purpose is to contract and make our heart beat. So different cells do have different kind of job descriptions, but they are all alive in and of themselves. There is something, I forget exactly how it's worded. It's worded different in different books, but I say it's kind of like the law of cells. So there are 3 components. This is a very testable thing. These 3 components of our cellular law. Okay, so first thing, all living things are made of cells. So human beings, we have trillions of cells, and they all do different jobs. Okay, an amoeba, it's one cell, but it's still a cell. Okay, rhinoceros, huge, lots of cells. Okay, so all living things are made of cells. Okay, we've already talked about the second point of the cellular law, is that the cell is the smallest unit of life. Okay, so if you break a cell apart into its components, those components are not alive. Okay, they have to be together as a cell to be alive. Okay? And then thirdly, all cells come from existing cells. So you cannot go into a laboratory, throw components together, and produce a living cell. The only place that cells come from are from previously alive cells. Okay? So to me, kind of a sidetrack, when we're looking at the definition of what is alive, okay, if we say that life is cellular, so if something is alive, it has to have cells. Kind of like, what about viruses? So are viruses alive? Because they kind of regulate their environment. They, reproduce, not in and of themselves. They kind of hijack something else's cells to reproduce, but they do reproduce. They have DNA or RNA, but they're not made of cells, so I don't know. I feel like the definition of is a virus alive changes daily. So just something that keeps me up at night. So point number 4 of what makes things alive, okay, we say that life is information-based, and to me this is very much a textbook way of them introducing genetics, okay. So we say that biological information is expressed via coded messages. Those coded messages are present in our DNA. Okay? How is it encoded in our DNA? Well, literally everybody's DNA has the same general structure. The only thing that's different is the sequence of the nucleotides. Okay? So these go on for billions and billions of nucleotides, and what order they're in kind of determines what the information that's encoded in that. And we'll talk a lot more about DNA and RNA in the upcoming weeks. So there are large chunks of DNA, so a certain segment of DNA that has a certain sequence, it might code for a particular thing. So we say that sequence of DNA is a gene. Okay? A gene is, just by definition, a segment of DNA that codes for a certain thing. When we say codes for a certain thing, genes code for particular proteins. So that portion of DNA can then be transcribed into an RNA molecule. That RNA can then be translated into a string of amino acids, which then fold on themselves to become a protein. So genes code for certain things. Okay, again, more on the genetics part of biochem later. All Just of note, because we did bring up proteins, um, why a gene might code for a certain protein. Well, we want a protein that does a certain job, okay? So how does a protein do a certain job? Well, it 1000% depends on how that protein is shaped, okay? So you'll hear me say it a lot, form equals function. Okay? So how a protein is shaped determines its job, okay? If you have an let's say a neurotransmitter, okay, it is only going to be able to signal a neuron and tell that neuron to do something or not do something if it is shaped correctly to fit in the little receptor on the neuron. Okay, so form equals function. Proteins are able to do their jobs because of what their shape is, and we'll talk, what happens if they're misshapen. Okay. Finally, I think this is point number 5 of what makes something alive or qualities of life or whatever intro stuff. Okay, we said that life adapts and evolves. Okay, so again, more genetics things. We say that the basis of all evolutionary change is a mutation in the DNA. So, what do we say? A mutation in DNA? That just means that there is some alteration of the sequence of nucleotides in a portion of DNA. Okay, so most mutations are what we call silent mutations, meaning they don't affect the organism whatsoever, okay, for good or bad. There are some mutations that are harmful to the organism, like the sickle cell mutation. It causes hemoglobin to be shaped incorrectly. Again, form equals function, shape equals function. So hemoglobin's misshaped, it can't do its job very well. So sickle cell disease is an excellent example of a mutation that is harmful. Okay, other mutations, rarely a mutation is actually beneficial for an organism. And when I say beneficial, I mean that it makes it easier or more likely for that organism to live, to grow into adulthood, and to reproduce. Okay, so if that mutation allows it to reproduce more than it normally would, its children may have that mutation passed on to them. They're able to reproduce more easily. They pass that on to their children, and so on and so on. And so at the end of everything, we say that the evolutionary process has changed this organism into slightly different organism through multiple generations because of a mutation in the DNA. Okay, so also we'll talk more about that probably in person. But that is the evolutionary biology spiel kind of right out of the gate. All right. So I said all of this. Let's look at, we're at 23 minutes. So I said all of that to say, this is the intro stuff to biochem. I wanted to do this video to kind of talk through it because it is a little scattered and all over the place from the first chapter. So once we get into more focused things, we'll talk more about proteins, and then subset of proteins we'll talk about enzymes, and then we'll talk about enzyme kinetics and how they work and all of that fun stuff. Okay, so I've got it here at the end of the first part of notes. We say that biochemistry is at the nexus of biology and chemistry, obviously, but there are molecules. So think of chemistry, molecules that determine how biological systems work. And we have 4 major biomolecules that exist as big macromolecules. So these are the 4, kind of like the 4 major points that we're going to talk about this semester and probably going on into next semester. So if you learn nothing, know that this is upcoming, okay? The 4 biomolecules that we're going to talk about are proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and nucleic acids. Okay, so again, proteins perform all the jobs in the cell, in the human being, in the whatever animal, and they are made up of monomer units called amino acids. Okay, carbohydrates tend to be more short-term fuel sources. Carbohydrates are also known as polysaccharides, and they are made up of monomers called monosaccharides, also known as simple sugars. Fats, also known as lipids, okay, they're not really made up of any particular monomer, so they're my least favorite of the macromolecules. They tend to be more, cell membrane stuff, long-term fuel storage, that kind of thing. And then lastly, nucleic acids, made up of nucleotides. These are RNA and DNA. They encode for all the proteins, all the things produced in our body. Okay? All right, so I'm going to take a break, probably watch some Bluey with the children for the 1,000th time, and then get on to filming the next video. So hopefully this was helpful. I know it's kind of some basic stuff that you've probably heard before, but at least we can all be on the same page going forward. So hopefully we'll get into a classroom soon and we can actually see each other in person. All right, see you in a bit.